the states would have to pass their own legislation. Now, if we look ahead, it's a very stiff target because we are running against time. But I think I would certainly like to give it a try.
And this was, as you say, it passed with a very unusual unanimity through both houses. Are we into a new phase of happy parliaments in India, or do you think we'll revert back to the usual scrappy politics?
Well, I think one of the strengths of Indian democracy has been, and we've seen it from 1991 onwards, there have been delays because in a large country, many political parties, many states in bringing everybody on board. But proposals which are reform-oriented have never had to be abandoned. They can be delayed because you require a larger consensus for a reform of this kind. But I think that's one of the great strengths of Indian democracy. And we must remember that 2016 India is very different from what it was even 25 years ago when we started the reform process. Today, the constituency that supports reforms is much larger. In fact, much larger than those who try to obstruct them. Secondly, the people have become far more aspirational. And the pressure of public opinion on political parties, members of legislative bodies, to reform and move forward, I think also is very high. Even in this case, I think public opinion had a very significant contribution to make.
But if the constituency for reform is much stronger, I mean, there have been, your government has seen through several important reforms, but one thing where we really haven't seen movement is privatization. And could you explain why that is? Isn't there more of a constituency for privatization, and particularly in the finance sector?
You see, in order to reach a particular level of reform, you have to evolve into that stage of a public opinion. Now, when you mention the finance sector, for instance, in funding a very large part of infrastructure in India, in funding a very large part of the social sector schemes in India, the public sector banks, despite competition, have had a far larger contribution. And therefore, I don't think the public opinion or the political opinion in India has still converged to a point where you are thinking in terms of any form of privatization in that sector. So some selective reforms do take place. For instance, we've announced a policy that government holding to be brought down to 52%. We are trying to consolidate some of the banks which may otherwise find it difficult in a competitive environment. We are also thinking in terms, in one case, to bring down the equity, as we have said, to 49%, the IDBI case. Now, these are all areas where work is in progress. But I think India still realizes that there has been a very important role some of these banks have performed. So in a consolidated manner, probably they would continue in the present shape.
But many of these banks are also have a serious debt problem. I mean, you've got a very high debt problem. Is the government going to take any more serious action to address the non-performing loans problem?
Well, the government has already initiated a large number of steps. A significant part of this debt problem has been created by sectoral stress in various sectors of the economy. Now, that was the single most important factor that caused this stress. Now, one after the other, there is not a single sector which we've left out. For instance, we have a whole package of reforms that we announced 2-3 months ago as far as the textile sector is concerned. The real estate sector, just last week, we've announced a very significant step to address the problem of the debt in that sector, because it's what we call the dual balance sheet problem, is the balance sheet of the companies in those sectors which then adversely impact the balance sheet of the public sector banks. As far as steel is concerned, which is another very contributory, we've announced already 6 months ago the various steps that we had to take. Power sector, particularly state discoms, we have addressed a large part of the progress. Therefore, this is very important work which is in progress. And if you were to ask me, after the passage and maybe the possible implementation of the GST, while that process is on, what would be my first priority at the moment? It's certainly the health of the public sector banks. Now, this is over and above whatever assistance from the budget that we are giving towards the capitalization of the banks.